Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. I'm an audiologist and strength coach, and I specialize in vestibular disorders. Welcome to my channel, The Steady Coach. Today we're going to be talking about the things you think you need to be doing to heal from chronic dizziness and the things that you should be doing instead. The number one thing that I get asked about is what exercises people should be doing for specific symptoms. People think they should be doing physical therapy or vestibular therapy to address any symptom that comes up. And while exercise and vestibular therapy exercises do have their place in reducing your fear of movement, and that may be valuable, this is actually not what you should be focusing on. Spending a bunch of time trying to play whack-a-mole with various symptoms through various exercises is just drawing your attention toward your symptoms, which increases that fear response, that danger response in the brain that keeps chronic dizziness going. Instead, what you should be focusing on is emotional awareness. I know that seems like a strange idea, but this is what I see really seem to make the difference when people are recovering from chronic dizziness. Here's what I mean by emotional awareness. When confronted with a daily life situation, you're going to respond with a whole host of different kinds of emotions. Some of those emotions are societally acceptable. For example, if someone cuts you off, it is acceptable for you to feel angry inside. But some of your responses are going to be a little bit less acceptable. For example, if your partner is the breadwinner and has had a really long day at work and comes in and sits down while you're emptying the dishwasher, it's a little bit less acceptable for you to feel anger, but you probably still feel anger. In the vast majority of people who I work with who have chronic dizziness, they have a really hard time expressing and accepting these less acceptable emotions. Even the people who consider themselves to be emotional people and very emotionally aware still tend to repress or run away from emotions that are less desirable. What I've noticed is that people with chronic dizziness and other chronic conditions like chronic pain have very rigid self-concepts sometimes as good people or perfectionists, and they do tend to be some of the best people I've ever met. But when you put a lot of pressure on yourself to be perfect or to be good, it means that those less savory, uglier types of emotions tend to be pushed to the side. So the remedy for this is to start to deliberately become more emotionally aware. There are different ways to do this. Some of it can just be experiential. Like in the moment, like I just described, you can think to yourself, how would a friend feel about this situation? How might my friend respond? What kinds of emotions might my friend have in response to this situation? And label them and see what you can find within yourself. If one of the emotions that you would expect from a friend is absent in yourself, it's time for reflection and some soul searching inside to see if that emotion is present and you're just not acknowledging it. This is where journaling can also be incredibly helpful, as well as talking to a friend or perhaps even a therapist. I know it seems simplistic to say, but emotional awareness is much more important than exercises in dealing with chronic dizziness. The second thing you probably think you should be doing for your chronic dizziness is a lot of breathing, a lot of relaxation, a lot of stress reduction, and a lot of meditation. And I love all of these things. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't do them, especially in the early stages of your recovery when you're overwhelmed with fear and panic. These techniques can be life-saving. But they should not be your focus. Rather than focusing on techniques that help you reduce stress in the moment, you should be focusing on techniques that help you reduce stress in the long run. And very specifically, instead of using the relaxation techniques we just described, you should be focusing on resolving internal conflicts. An internal conflict occurs when you have a split mind about a particular situation or person. For example, you might hate your job, but also really need to bring home the money. You might love your spouse, but also be angry with that person for sitting at the dining room table while you're emptying the dishwasher. Internal conflicts like these arise all the time. In people with chronic dizziness, the way this tends to go is that the different sides of the internal conflict are not usually given equal voice. But what I mean is, because of perhaps rigid self-concept, like we talked about earlier, or other factors, you may feel like your own needs on that side of the equation are less important than the needs of whatever else is going on the other side of the equation. This automatically is going to lead to emotions of anger inside you because you're not getting your needs met. Anger that is not expressed, that you're not even aware of, is a huge source of stress that your nervous system can then use to keep your cycle of chronic dizziness going. So a huge part of recovery from chronic dizziness is realizing, first of all, that these internal conflicts are even there, that you even have needs that aren't being met in these situations. You may choose not to address them differently from how you are today, but you do deserve to have your needs have a voice in these situations. And for many people, that makes all the difference. Just being aware that you have unmet needs, instead of steamrolling over them, acknowledging that they're there, is a huge step forward in recovering from chronic dizziness. Because again, when you don't do that, you end up with a whole lot more repressed stress inside that increases the likelihood that your dizziness is going to keep going. The third thing that you think you might need to be doing right now is neuroplasticity programs or structured programs. And as you know, I have my own structured program because some people like having a structured program. But I'm going to come right out and say this, you do not need one. In fact, the downside of a structured program is, like exercises, it can draw your attention over and over and over again to your dizziness instead of helping you focus on the things that really matter. We talked about emotional awareness, we talked about internal conflicts, and now what you should be focusing on instead of neuroplasticity or refocusing on your symptoms is sources of external conflicts. There may be actual situations in your life right now where you do actually need to make a stand and change things. So before we talked about internal conflicts and talked about how just acknowledging that you might have needs that you weren't even aware of is a big component of resolving internal conflicts. But with external conflicts, sometimes something is going on that's really just not right. I've heard some practitioners who work with people with psychophysiological disorders say that one of the most important words that you can learn when you're recovering from something like chronic dizziness is the word no. People who have chronic dizziness tend to have a really hard time setting boundaries because they really want to help other people. They are perfectionists, they're warm and loving, they're do-gooders. And when you perceive yourself this way, you're going to have a really hard time saying no, even when you should. So take a look at other situations in your life where you feel like maybe you haven't set the boundaries you need to set, and think about how you can go about setting them. This is much more important than a neuroplasticity program. The other thing that you think you need to be focusing on when you have chronic dizziness is things like chiropractic care, acupuncture, massage, and special devices like special glasses to help you with your symptoms. Now, I'm not saying that I want any of you to suffer any longer than you have to, but again, this never-ending conveyor belt of people to patch you up and deal with the symptoms is not actually dealing with the cause of your symptoms. The cause of your symptoms is all these things we've already talked about in this video. Now, in my other videos, often I'll just kind of use an umbrella term like stress, but we've talked now about emotional awareness, we've talked about repressed emotions, we've talked about interpersonal conflicts, we've talked about internal conflicts. And so now, rather than focusing on the care that others can give you, whether via services or devices, what you should be focusing on is the care that you can give yourself. This is known as self-compassion. And I know that this sounds very fluffy, but actually measures of self-compassion are much better at predicting happiness than measures of self-esteem. So in other words, being kinder to yourself is a much better predictor of how happy you're going to be versus how highly you think of yourself. Developing self-compassion is not easy, but I'm going to tell you right now that you actually have an advantage you don't even know about. And that is that if you're watching this and you have chronic dizziness, you are almost certainly an exceptionally kind and caring person. It's exceptionally kind and caring people who tend to develop chronic dizziness because they're always caring about others and not about themselves. But you can use the skills that you apply to other people and turn them inward. The best way to do this is to think about difficult situations that you might have gone through in the past or that you're going through now, and think about a close friend or a loved one going through that same situation. how would you respond to that person? Is it different from how you responded to yourself? Is it different from that voice in your head, that narrator in your head that criticizes you or that says, oh, this really isn't that hard for you, like this person has it way worse? Remember, your nervous system doesn't understand that kind of nuance. Your nervous system understands safe and not safe. So it really doesn't matter what's happening to your neighbor or across the world. What matters is that if something's hard, it's just hard. And it's okay for you to give yourself kindness and compassion regardless of what's going on around you to other people. One of the things that you can do to help solidify this practice is write a letter to yourself, expressing the kindness that you would to someone else going through whatever situation you've had. There's actually a whole workbook on this by Dr. Kristin Neff. I will link to that below, called the SelfCompassion Workbook. The next thing that you might think you need to be focusing on is supplements and diet. I have a whole video about the role of supplements and diet in your recovery, but let's just say that they don't play a central role in resolving your chronic dizziness, because most of the time, even though diet and supplements can help keep you healthy, it's not a general health problem that's led you to have chronic dizziness. It's stress and some of these other things that we've talked about in this video. So rather than focusing on diet and lifestyle changes, which again, I'm a huge proponent for, so I'm not saying you shouldn't do them, but rather than focusing all your attention on them, spend some time thinking about the situations that you've dealt with in the past that are influencing how you view your life today. Everyone who I've worked with who has chronic dizziness has some kind of difficult experiences that he or she has gone through in the past. And remember, if your nervous system learned that a particular experience or situation was dangerous in the past, it's going to apply that logic to situations now that remind it of those old situations, even if it's not the same situation. A more extreme example is a child who grew up with an alcoholic parent. That person may have trust issues with a spouse, even if the spouse never drinks, because in the past, that child's close loved one and caregiver was not safe and stable all the time. That's just a very simple example. Obviously, these situations are usually a lot more complicated than that, but it's important to acknowledge the role that past experiences are probably playing in how your nervous system is responding to your current experiences today. Even if your life right now is absolutely perfect in every respect, first of all, I commend you. I don't know how you did that. But even if everything is safe and lovely right now, your nervous system might still be finding threat around every corner if it learned that the world was a threatening place sometime earlier in your life. Spending some time journaling about these experiences, for example, can be really helpful. And if you have truly traumatic experiences that you don't think you fully resolved, then it's a really good idea to work with a therapist on those. And finally, the most important thing that you probably think you need to be doing for your chronic dizziness is to get a biological diagnosis. Now, if you've gotten a PPPD diagnosis, you might already feel like that's the end of the road, and that's great. You can fast forward to what I say you should be doing instead. But for many of you, even if you have a PPPD diagnosis or MDDS or chronic migraines or vestibular migraine, you probably still have a lot of doubts about what's going on. You're probably still visiting a whole bunch of doctors and other health professionals to try to get answers. And I understand this. As I've said in some of my previous videos, doubt is baked in to chronic dizziness. Because if your nervous system is trying to protect you from something, it wants to send a really strong signal. It's not going to let you just ignore it. Those symptoms that you feel in your body are 100% real. Your nervous system is ensuring that they're real to keep you away from danger. But the most important thing that you need to do for your recovery is to accept the diagnosis of neural circuit dizziness. You can call it whatever you want, but ultimately what neural circuit dizziness means is that your body does not have disease or structural damage that cannot be reversed. Neural circuit dizziness means that your dizziness is coming from a nervous system malfunction. In other words, a bad pattern in the brain that's being activated by a nervous system that is expecting threat when there isn't any, and that this is reversible. It can cause true physiological problems. It can cause true changes in blood flow and changes in your vestibular function. So it can lead to true physical symptoms, not just in your head, but you have to accept that these changes are reversible when you deal with the underlying issue, which again is a nervous system that is not regulated. And the way to regulate that nervous system is through all of the techniques that we just talked about in this video. Sure, relaxation techniques can help, having a sympathetic massage therapist can help. All of those things may be helpful to you in managing some of your anxiety and your symptoms. But your focus should be on growing as a person and dismantling this cycle of stress that started your neural circuit dizziness and is keeping it going. I hope this video was helpful for you guys. Please drop any questions or comments below. And if you liked this video, please share, like, and subscribe. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.